And here we are, back for week 2. And Dan, you were saying that you got some pretty interesting contacts over the week.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating just to have people reaching out and connecting with me on Facebook, and a lot of new faces. Um, and just a couple people that have already read through the book. So that was fascinating. Some of those speed readers out there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm glad to hear that. So why don't we go ahead and get you off and going here?
All right. Well, hello everyone. Just so glad to be back with you. Really have enjoyed the time already. I mean, the first class I thought was just a wonderful time to begin to talk about these things. Um, and as we look at this book, I wanted to just review a little bit because we'll continue to build. If anything, you will find that I'm a very chronological person. I'd like to do things in order. And that's a lot of how I've constructed the understanding of Schaeffer's Apologetic in the book. I tried to build very slowly, methodically, and get us there. And so, one of the items of review really is um, this overall historical context that we're trying to build. So, the formulation of the work, I was really seeking to understand Schaeffer's Apologetics. So, through his published works and articles, even some that weren't published. The key scholars and apologists that I knew of, the question and challenges of methodology and classifications that you sometimes run into in reading some of the other books that attempt to get at Schaeffer's apologetic. And sometimes they, like I mentioned, may have their own mission in mind about the things that they want to cover rather than actually getting at how to do Schaeffer's apologetic. And I think even some of the best books that are out there sometimes have had to struggle through some of that information in order to get there. So I'm as you said, noticed in the open uh, part of my bio, if you will, and the really purpose of Francis Schaeffer Studies is try to make Schaeffer's thought more accessible. And so that's what we're trying to do with this apologetic here. And so to do that, one of the things that I also felt was really important was to get at the historical background of Schaeffer's apologetic. Uh, where did this come from? What was going on? And so you have different his works, the people and scholars that followed him, and so you get and then also the historical context. And in a way, I kind of got that backwards there. We start really with the historical, then build off of the key scholars that comment on that, and then likewise the published works that are his actual representation of his thought. So
You know,
that's
I'm going to enter just for a moment, just
sure.
for the viewers. Phil Fernandez, Dr. Phil Fernandez, did a really good book on apologetics methodologies.
Hmm.
Because for some, there's sort of this idea that there's an inspired inerrant apologetic, and if you don't do it, this way, then you're not really doing apologetics as God would have you
Right.
do it. And he comes up with something like 17 different types of apologetics methodologies.
Yes, and Phil and I have actually had some really deep discussions on that, and actually, he also um, passed me some information on his analysis of Schaeffer in respect to apologetics. So it's been a while, but uh, I felt like that he was largely on.
Okay, good.
Yeah, wonderful. So now I brought in just a few slides from our old history timeline that's on our website.
Mm.
These some of these pictures are a little bit small and a little bit grainy, so I apologize for that because this is our old timeline. I do have a newer version that eventually will relaunch, but But here's a picture of Dr. Schaeffer in his early years when he accepted Christ. And I mentioned already that he had checked out a book on Greek philosophy, and that's where he got the basic questions that he began to analyze. And then he read the Bible with those questions in mind. So that formulation was so significant for him. And we'll get into more of that tonight. Likewise, with his realizing that the same questions at times that he was dealing with himself, as well as the ones that where he was talking with children in his ministry, Children for Christ, at St. Louis in Missouri, his Bible Presbyterian Church at the time, was super significant because he realized that we all have the same questions.
Right.
And so someone has a pen, I think, that's snapping. So just FYI. And then likewise, in 1947, I mentioned also that he had traveled to Europe. He was doing missionary exploration work for the Independent Board of Presbyterian Foreign Missions. That exposed him to the world culture, something that really kind of overwhelmed him and he was very moved by. And so pretty significant. And you see that some of the things that he came about in his movie, or actually his film series, How Shall We Then Live, are inspired, I think, by some of that early journey, but then in a later time. Then likewise, this one I did not mention, but I also feel that this is very important. Four scholars, Young, Buswell, Bennett, and Stam. So this shows you that Schaeffer had a connection with Buswell. If people know the context of Buswell and Van Til's debate over classical versus presuppositional apologetics. So Schaeffer knew Buswell and actually traveled with him in 1950 to visit, of all people, Karl Barth. And so Schaeffer asked him this question because Schaeffer knew that Barth was kind of fostering something of a religious existentialism in his Barthian mode of thought. Now, that gets kind of complicated into various terminologies and things of that nature, and I'm no thorough expert on Barth, but what you find out there from just a simple question and answer that Schaeffer later conveyed, I believe it was Edith conveyed in the Tapestry. She talks about him looking out over Lake Geneva and saying to Barth, "What about this world?" So I know you've got a world view, but what about this world? And he waves his arm out over Lake Geneva. And Barth said to him flatly, "This world doesn't matter." And basically, that it was far removed from what the true religious forms were, the things that were the only thing of real importance to Barth. And then this natural world was fleeting and had no significance. And so kind of a strange dynamic there. Imagine those two being in the same room. And so anyway, I mentioned that because that did influence some of his later cultural apologetics. 1951, Schaeffer goes through his spiritual crisis. He's because at that time he had actually, after meeting Barth, he actually presented a paper on Barth's thought. And then one of the things that later he began to notice in that same year was that many people in that movement, the separatist movement at the time, had a lot of truth, but not a lot of compassion, not a lot of love. And so that became a real serious issue for him. And so he broke things down and began to restart and rebuild everything. And so in 1954, he would actually cultivate that into a lecture series, and he would travel throughout the U.S. in that time. And this was kind of to get funding for the missionary work. And I think he did like 300 330 some days or something to that effect. It's over 300 different speaking events in the space of a year. So really extreme. But he's a young guy and very capable. So, and then finally, 1955, the founding of L'Abri, and so opening the doors of L'Abri to invite people in as a place where they could go to get their questions answered. And that was a specific mission statement of their home. And so they were inviting people in to get their questions answered. And they were literally people would come and they'd work there, and then they'd have dinner with them. And so there was just kind of this ongoing lifestyle that developed out of L'Abri. And so that took place for about 10 years before this other event, 1965. And I have to apologize for this one. The title of the Wheaton Lectures is Speaking the Historic Christian Position into the 20th Century. There may have been some other slight publications with that title that I show there, but the actual title is Speaking the Historic Christian Position into the 20th Century. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of explain why I'm going over all these and how they pertain to tonight's topic of questions. Specifically, the basic philosophical questions. I believe that that Schaeffer formulated his understanding of the overall approach of his apologetics based on day one of his conversion. He began with the basic philosophical questions and learned the basic philosophical questions, and then that same over the next 6 months read the Bible and began to process what was in the Bible to understand how it answered the basic philosophical questions. And what he means by that is quite important because it becomes a foundational basis for his approach. And so if we think about it, he founds this L'Abri, and L'Abri is the L'Abri Fellowship. That word L'Abri means a shelter. And of course, they advertise it as a place you can go to get your question answered. And I should also mention, when I say advertise, I don't mean advertise as in they were selling advertisements or buying advertisement or even promoting it. In fact, it was very organic. What they would do is they spread the word that way, where people would, when they were talking to people in Europe, they would just mention to him, well, why don't you go to L'Abri? It's a place you could go to get your questions answered. And people would just show up at their doorstep and say, yeah, I'm here. I heard I could get my questions answered here. And so if you can imagine what that looked like, that has to be quite a significant place in order for that to even transpire. And so what we begin to look at is something of Schaeffer's mindset. And so Jerome Barr says it like this. He says, he did not develop the apologetic approach in a study far removed from the lives of real people. He developed the answers he gives in all his apologetic writings and lectures in the heart of the battle, so to speak. His home was filled with people seeking answers to the questions of existence, morals, and knowledge. Almost all of the lectures were given in response to questions, doubts, and struggles of those staying with us. The issues addressed in Schaeffer's apologetic works are the questions of real people. So you have this place that begins to open up, and they have all these people coming in, and it's kind of miraculous that this begins to happen. So as they're discussing this, they're discussing these basic philosophical questions. And so, again, to unpack a little bit more about what he means by that, it has to be crouched in a certain environment in order to actually even begin to get there. We'll explain that first before I give the analysis of the basic philosophical questions. So it's a shelter. It has hospitality. It has beauty. It's a safe place. The ability to answer. It has knowledge. You have to have knowledge. You have to have the ability to analyze questions, and you have to have the truth. And so this becomes kind of the crux of their ministry environment that they're offering for people. And that's the overall concept here. And so here's what Schaeffer means by this basic philosophical questions. I believe it's in a section of specifically of the how he is there and he is not silent, where he's labeled it the physical metaphysical necessity. He says we should understand first of all what the three basic areas of philosophic thought are. The first is in the area of metaphysics of being. This is the area of what is, the problem of existence. This includes the existence of man, and we must realize that the existence of man is no greater problem as such than it is the fact that that anything exists at all. No one said it better than Jean-Paul Sartre, who said that the basic philosophical question is that something is there rather than nothing being there. Nothing that is worth calling a philosophy can sidestep the fact that things do exist and that they exist in their present form and complexity. This is what I mean when then by the problem of metaphysics, the existence of being. So that's a lot. But he's saying that there is the question of being and what is kind of the foundational area of philosophical thought. And he talks about three basic areas, but he's really talking about being, man's existence, and then also that includes man's existence closely connected to really a third paradigm, man's dilemma. And when you start to think about that, what you realize is that it's a common notion for people. And so Schaeffer, actually one of my mentors, a guy named Mark Miller, who introduced me to Schaeffer, described Schaeffer like this. He says, Schaeffer believes that there are two kinds of philosophers, those who know they are and those that do not. So this is basically Schaeffer saying this. As soon as we use the word philosophy, and these big words for that matter, even among university people, most people think of philosophy being shut up to a relatively few people in life, a few people who specialize in an academic subject called philosophy. But in reality, philosophy means two things, and the two should be kept very carefully separate, though they are related. Philosophy as an academic subject is indeed pursued by relatively few people in life, but this is not then to shut away the other concept of philosophy, and that is philosophy as a man's worldview. In this sense, every man is a philosopher. It is false to say philosophy is only for the few, unless you mean the specific academic subject. If you mean the question of worldview, we must comprehend that all men have a philosophy, and in this sense, all men are philosophers. And so this actually is coming from his Wheaton lectures, which was the last one that we talked about, last historical one. So they bring this forward just a little bit, and we clarify, we are all philosophers, all have presuppositions, and all have a worldview. And as Mark Ryan says, describing the presupposition and worldview, basic values and commitment. And what does he mean by presupposition? Well, presupposition in Schaeffer's mindset is basically, what do I presuppose? What are the values and commitments, according to Mark Ryan's here, explanation. What are the values and commitments that I have about how the world exists and functions and reality? What are my things that I presuppose about the world? And then that's also part of my worldview. So I think worldview and presuppositions are slightly different. The worldview is your overall worldview about everything that you see, but you also have logical presuppositions within a worldview about that, how I presuppose about certain aspects of things that are in my world. Okay. And what Schaeffer's trying to get at is that we have these questions and these presuppositions and these worldviews, but we're not alone. We all have basic values and commitments that we bring to the table. Anytime you discuss anything with anyone, you are carrying some sort of values with that discussion. And I'll elaborate on that in a little bit here. So what does Schaeffer mean by that? Well, Schaeffer is talking about, when he says the basic philosophical questions, he's talking about the kind of the core things, core questions, but he doesn't mean just only those things. Like imagine if somebody came to your home and they sat down with you, and all of a sudden you just pronounced him, okay, we're going to talk about metaphysics. A lot of people will be put off. They might not warm up to that. But what you find, though, is that people sometimes carry the various things that we hold in our viewpoints and our positions, and it comes out naturally in discussion. So in the area of metaphysics, we're talking about being and origin. Where did all this come from? Right. And we're also talking about man. Where did man come from? And a Schaeffer's term, the mannishness of man, what makes man unique in the world. And then man's dilemma, which also includes the aspects, too, of the moral implications that are involved in man's essence, as far as who he is and how he solves the problems of life, whether he could solve them morally or amorally. And so the basic philosophical questions are really there naturally as a part of who we are. And some people may have not thoroughly contemplated them, but many, many have certain viewpoints. And when I talk about it coming about, and sometimes in strange things, a lot of times I don't necessarily call people distinctly out and let's talk about metaphysics, But what I remember having a discussion one time with a coworker, and he's quite upset about all of this stuff going on in politics and culture, and he's just mad about it. And he's like, "That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong." And he's real just upset about it. And what I did is I stopped at that point and I said, "Well, I know why I, as a Christian, believe those things are wrong. But why do you believe they're wrong?
Right.
On what basis do you believe that they're wrong?" How do you, and basically what I was doing, I was asking him about man's dilemma. I was connecting the dots that there is an ultimate reality behind what you're saying. You're saying something's wrong, but you have no basis for saying it's wrong because you have no God, no basis for morality, etc. So where are you going to get that? I might be able to help you with that, by the way. And he didn't. He got really stumped and kind of frustrated, and I could tell he was already kind of upset about it. But he did want to talk again later. But he's but he said, I don't know that I need a reason. I'm like, well, I would say ultimately, I think you do, right? Because everything's based on something. We have to have an origin for the nature of our thought. Otherwise, you're just kind of making up stuff. Because I went into another illustration. I said, well, imagine if somebody comes here from another country, and in their country, they believe it's okay to go around and pick up stuff off people's porches and and rob people's cars, because that's what we do in our country. Is that right? And what basis do you have for saying that's wrong? And I just kind of helped him with that. And he said, well, you're very good at this, but I'll think about that when we talk later. So, and it was a work situation. I wanted to keep things professional. But again, you can imagine some of that goes on. And so everything that when you deal with people, you're dealing with questions that are deep and philosophical, but sometimes people have those in a different context. So, but Schaeffer's, remember the title of that first Wheaton lecture, Speaking the Historic Christian Position into the 20th Century. That was the name of his title. Well, interestingly enough, we have these doctrines called creation, fall, redemption, and the redemption in Christ also includes moral law and the aspects of the ultimate reality. And the fall addresses man's dilemma. The creation gives us clarity regarding meaning. So we have the answers to these questions. If we take these basic philosophical questions, we're not without answers. All of us as Christians, if you're listening and you are a Christian, you already know this. If you're not a Christian, then maybe you're struggling with some of these questions. And we would submit to you that this is the way that we understand it to be. And not only that, we believe that it's easily confirmed by realizing that it corresponds with that which is there. So we'll take it at that and leave it there. But so I'll stop there and give us just a little bit of time for discussion. Did you guys have some thoughts on that? What do you think about this notion of Schaeffer's, the basic philosophical questions?
I think those are very basic to what pretty much every apologist even now to this day still pretty much use it, the whole dilemma where people say, well, the morality issue, So that's very, very interesting that how he reached it, and got to it, but he definitely put some thought in that, and it's really, really cool. I like the part also about how he connected the children, the aspect of their questions in relation to the adults' questions, the similarities, and for him to reach that idea that these are the same questions, maybe a little different formatting, but same question.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, because when you're exposed to children, unless you're exposed to children, you might not have seen it, and he was. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a hidden thing sometimes when people have looked at a lot of his apologetics, and I've seen that in the books, not really accounting for the tenderness that he understood,
Right.
but he really felt like that he could speak to anyone. But if you look at his book, Two Contents, Two Realities, it's like a little small book. It's based off a presentation from a presentation that he did at the World Congress on Evangelism. That's the International Congress on Evangelism. And he's on record with that. And it ended up being published later on. So you can see if we can get it in front of it. I don't know if we can.
Oh, there it is.
In this book. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that got published there, but then also later on became kind of reworked into a smaller pamphlet book. Mm. But one of the things he says in there is that you are, it doesn't matter the type of, okay, I lost my thought a little bit.
I do that often.
You do that often?
Join the club, right?
Well, in his two contents, two realities, he's making statements about the two contents that we need and the two realities we need in evangelism. And so, but what's interesting about that is that when you go and you look at where it is placed in his complete works, it's in the volume on spirituality.
Mm.
So Schaeffer saw that the the grace and compassion that's needed in apologetics needs to be a spiritual format in life. It needs to connect to the personal and connect to who we are as beings, as and in relation to Christ. And so, because Schaeffer wasn't explicitly a thorough academic, he doesn't sometimes have the tendency to slice or dice or divide. To him, it's holistic in its approach and means that it touches everything. And so when I'm talking with someone, here comes the part that I had lost train of thought. Maybe the Lord wanted me to state all that other is that when you're going to talk with someone, you want to begin to speak the language of the people that you're talking to. And that involves changing the way you say things. So Schaeffer, if you read his books, you're going to get a certain uh, way of saying things, and it's many times very heady. He's using big words. He's using his major Schaefferisms, what I call them, where he's using the terms and everything that he's crafted for these things. But then when he's speaking with people in like the dock worker or the young girl working at a counter, he talks about at one place in his books. Another, if he's talking to a child, he's going to change his language a little bit so that he can help them understand and be the best possible voice of speaking that information to them.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And someone said too, this is even basic in our liturgical teaching in church. God created by the power of his word. We are fallen in our sin, unable to do anything within ourselves due to the spiritual death. Yeah, I think that's a significant thing to say. We're most definitively dealing with obviously the need to communicate rightly and at least do it well. Now that's part of the questions, and I also the other comment there, we're saved by faith in Christ alone, right? And that should not be dismissed either. The way we talk to people sometimes might be even used when we say it wrong. And that is part of the beauty of the Holy Spirit working and being empowered by God to do what he does. He knows the best way to minister. And that's one thing I point out in the book is that we need to make sure that we are constantly aware that we're not alone in the conversation.
Right.
We're not the only one speaking.
Well,
And that is definitely a part of Schaeffer's notion of apologetics connected with spirituality and the God who is there. We acknowledge him. And in fact, when Schaeffer went to the guys that were one of the guys in England that later became his son-in-law, he reached out in front of him because the guy's asking them, so what's all this L'Abri about? And the very first thing Schaeffer did was reach out in front of him and he said, true spirituality is right here. Could you imagine somebody saying that to you? And he said, I kind of got chills there a little bit because I wasn't really sure. I never heard anybody say things like that. And God is there. And that is the point of it all. Go ahead, Don.
The idea, I like the idea of the question and it touching both those who are doing the apologetic and unbelievers who are involved with it. And
Mhm.
as I thought about that, I thought about, well, this is something I do.
Mhm.
Greg Kuchel wrote a really interesting book, and I felt like he must have followed me around because he wrote about how I do things.
That's right.
Really, he was just doing the same kinds of things I do, and he was telling others about it. And if you think about it, Jesus did the same thing. He very often used questions to answer questions
Yeah.
and to raise and to help people to think more deeply about, in some cases, a question that they were putting up to create a problem for him, only to come to the realization that they're the ones with the problem,
Yeah.
right? So, which is the greatest commandment? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he goes on and says, oh, and the other one's like the first one. It's just love your neighbor as yourself. And so the rich young ruler had to kind of deal with this after posing the question.
Hmm.
It just got turned on him. And so we do that a lot in at least Midwest Christian Outreach. James
Mhm.
does, I do, when we're talking with Wiccans or with the
Mhm.
Druids or with atheists. It's the same kind of a thing. Why should we not harm someone else?
Right.
What
Yeah. Yeah.
what is the
The standard, basically.
yeah, where does it come from? Not
Where
what is the standard, but where does it come from? It doesn't originate with us,
right.
because then it would just be a sort of a mob rule. Whoever mob is in charge makes the rules about how we should behave.
Mm-hmm.
But we discover as we talk further with them that it comes from somewhere outside of ourselves, and all of us fundamentally believe in the basic right and wrong of how we should behave.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's ultimate guardrails on existence,
Right.
and as we're speaking into their reality, there's as we develop this more and talk about dealing with some of the things that we will encounter in questions in later class, I'll deal with those the matter of what's called tensions and Schaeffer, and that's obviously too the title of the book, Truth Amidst Tension. Schaeffer really dealt with uh, people's tensions and helped them, and there's a methodology or approach to that, but also a careful balance that must be maintained. And so you are wanting to call them into an understanding that their current presuppositions, their current worldviews, are not in line with the real world. In fact, if they're not following Christ truly, then they are in conflict with the world that's there. And because and as we begin to deal with those, we'll see that the matter of tensions become a very significant thing that can be leveraged. But on the basic level, as we begin to talk with someone, we may just want to listen. And Schaeffer talked about listening for 55 minutes. What is he listening for? Well, he's listening and analyzing. And in another place, I've heard him say that several times. He said, I want to hear what their philosophers are saying. I want to hear what their mindset is what's the thrust behind their system, not just what they're saying, but what's the thrust behind their system and where are they coming from. Obviously, we'll find them immediately to be in conflict with the world that's there, but that's also a careful thing to learn how to listen, learn how to do that rightly. So that's what I want to talk about next.
Dan, I think you're touching on one of the most important things about Schaeffer,
Yeah.
and that is he was uniquely good at listening.
Mm-hmm.
I observe so many apologetics encounters where people are arguing, and the Christian and non-Christian are both trying to win the argument, and all the non-Christian is wanting to do is score points. He's not really engaging with truth. Schaeffer, by listening, accomplished two things that really made him great. One is he came to an understanding of where non-Christians were coming from, what the humanistic philosophy that was really driving the 20th century as it moves toward our own day. He understood those things better than anybody else,
Mm-hmm.
not primarily because he'd read more philosophers, although he certainly had done that, but because he listened to people and really cared about where they were coming from. And so that gives him his understanding, but it also changes the dynamic of the conversation to where if the person you're talking to really gets the idea that you care about them and care about what they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
then uh, by your listening, you help them to listen better, and they may actually be hearing the gospel rather than simply hearing, well, okay, where's my next opportunity to jab back and make my point and make you look silly, which is unfortunately the way a lot of these things go, especially on the internet.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think maybe we want quick solutions in these debates or the exchanges, but really, if we're dealing with real people take time. That's one thing that was a little bit kind of startling. I'd say startling, but it was just it was both moving and like, wow, okay. When I took Jerem Barr's apologetics class at Covenant, he went on forever about this one exchange where it literally it was like with his father-in-law, I believe. And anyway, but it was some relative there. I hope I didn't get that wrong, but basically he had taken years with him, just slowly, patiently speaking at the right moments, uh, taking time for him, letting him know that he cared about him. He had his best interest at heart. And so I think that's one of the things that's so significant is that it has to be based in our conversations with real people, is that we have to be real.
Yeah.
We can't just kind of throw stuff out and then attempt to just win the argument. We may have the ability to do so, but we have to discern, is this the right time?
Yeah.
And what would be the results of that? So with this, then we're learning that everyone has the same ultimate questions. We're all asking questions. Some of the ones I break out in the book, I start to spell out that what correspond to this. Where did I come from? Where am I going? Why are people so evil in the world? Uh, why does death happen? People have these kind of questions, everyday people, and we all have them. And so we have to learn to listen for those worldview questions. Sometimes they're masked. Sometimes they'll sugarcoat them in different ways to make themselves feel better, or they'll say things that are kind of offhand, but not really getting at what they truly believe. And so you have to ask them. Some will be dishonest, and some will need to take. Some we will need to take blows in that, and sometimes maybe even take where they don't like us. I've had times when I've spoken the truth to people and been rejected, and I'm like, okay, well, at least I told you the truth, and hopefully they can discern that I've tried to deal rightly with them. Nearly every communication carries with it some worldview connotation, so that when you're talking, you are communicating something of your worldview, whether you mean to or not. Like I was telling you with my friend, he had a moral understanding of what should be going on in the world. I'm like, well, that is a worldview connotation, so that carries with it that. So discern when to speak on those matters. And then as we think about that, we also need to help them understand sometimes in contrast. One of the I'll explain a little bit more on this as we get into the next class. But if we think about it, the materialist, if we were just to analyze that one group, where the problem of existence, well, there's no one home in the universe. Who's going to answer my questions? Well, there's no one to answer questions, not in an ultimate sense. Where did man come from? There's no explanation for man. In fact, man's an accident. That, if they're really honest, should lead them to a place of despair, because they're alone. And that aloneness, Schaeffer calls out as being something of the despair of mankind that we need to speak to. And so if you consider that in contrast, as you, sorry that happens. So let me go back and hit the button too fast. And wow, I went way ahead. Okay, so I think I skipped. Okay, so there is. So in contrast to that, we need to help them see something that is commending the Christian position. And I believe Schaeffer gives us something quite wonderful here. The Bible teaches that though man is hopelessly lost, he's not nothing. In other words, he's not an accident, like they were saying. He's not alone. Man is lost because he is separated from God, his true reference point, but by true moral guilt. But he will never be nothing. Therein lies the horror of his lostness. For man to be lost in all his uniqueness and wonder is tragic. So Schaeffer sometimes talks about, and he says this at different points in his books, he talks about truth with tears. And this is definitely a point that sometimes Schaeffer would be kind of tearful, because he can see before him a person sitting there, a person made in the image of God. And he thinks he's nothing. He thinks he's lost. He thinks there's no one home, no one there to speak or answer questions. And he's dealing with all these questions and doesn't really know what to do. And Schaeffer was wanting to point out that, no, you're not alone. You're not you're hopelessly lost right now, but there is redemption. There is a way to be connected with God. There is your true reference point is here, right here. And the guilt that you feel can be cleansed, and you will never be nothing, as far as I'm concerned. So you've already, by this taking the step of acknowledging their existence as created in the image of God, as someone special and unique and important to God, is a logical step in the direction toward helping them understand who they truly are in God's reality. They may not understand yet about who they are or who they will be in Christ, but if we help them in that step to understand who they are as far as their creative role, then they begin to see something of the glimpse and something of the answer to the basic philosophical questions, right? And so there's that. And then, so contrast, man is not nothing, and he is, nor is he an accident. God, the God who is there listens and has spoken. So that's our testimony before them, and the way that we can do it. Now, I had a guy one time approach me, and it was in public, and he he knew that I was like talking to people about Christ, so he got really kind of vile with me. And I just told him, I looked at him earnestly, and I said, well, no matter what your opinion, I respect your right to have it, and I do believe that you were made by God as something special. And he stopped his bickering for a moment and thanked me, and then it kind of was able to move forward. So I think that's something that we can constantly be ready to acknowledge, is that we have something that we can give them of revelation, the revelation of God, uh, that is natural revelation, before we expose them to just the concept of salvation.
So, so what he's doing is kind of almost speaking to, say, Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot, because life is meaningless. There's no point to it. So
Right.
you have two guys having this mindless conversation about nothing, waiting for someone to come who just never shows up, because life is meaningless and pointless.
Mm.
And Schaeffer's going, no, has meaning because there is someone, and that is the God who is there. Is that
Definitely.
accurate?
Yeah, that is. It's definitely the case. I mean, and um, Schaeffer says this, and I reference it later in the book, but Schaeffer says that pre-evangelism is no soft option. And I would even further double down on it, that our ineptitude sometimes in the Christian church to not understand pre-evangelism has made us lazy on evangelism, as far as lazy on apologetics. And we sometimes will jump right to the argument, but then skip the person.
Mm.
We'll jump right to the issue, but skip the reality before us of the individual, the natural revelation that's before us. And God's like, if we acknowledge what God has done and God has done there, then it opens up a whole new dynamic. And I have other stories to tell you, but I mean, uh, these kind of open up so many different understandings with acknowledging creation, acknowledging what God has done.
Mm.
You
Well,
know,
people want life to be meaningless because, in the short run, that means there's no reason why they can't do what they want to do. And
True.
it's really finding a way of rationalizing their rebellion against God and His law. And so, I mean, that's where listening comes in, because you have to realize, okay, uh, I'm not going to convince this guy by giving him reasons why life is not meaningless. He wants it to be that way
Mm.
because he thinks
right.
that lets him do whatever he wants, pursue his
Right.
lifestyle, and nobody can say anything about it. And well, okay, that might work for you in the short run, but isn't there not something that is more to you uh, than just enjoying the privilege of doing what you want to do because there's nobody in authority that can say you can't, or that can say you need to be doing something different? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the price of meaninglessness is not something we're ultimately able to pay. In the short run, we can put it off, but there are those larger questions that ultimately come into play. Okay, uh, so you do whatever it is that you want to do that God says you shouldn't do for another 10, 20, 50 years. After that, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
And uh, if it's really true that once you die, it'll be as if you had never existed, then what
Right.
difference does it make?
Right.
Why do you care about being able to do these things? Because it's all going to be as if you had never done them. There's nothing there to carry forward.
Hmm.
Couldn't you not consider the possibility that maybe there is something better than that out there? But if there is, then we have to accept it for what it is. It's not going to be what we necessarily want it to be. And if there is a God who made us with a purpose, would in the long run he not know better than we what is really going to fulfill us? I mean, these are the questions that you keep raising. It's questions, you know, because just telling people uh, there's resistance. You're saying it's this, they're saying it's not, but the questions leave them in a position where the possibility of moving to a different place is opened up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they can't argue with you because you're just asking questions.
Well,
Yeah.
And
right.
questions that cause their whole worldview to crumble if they let you ask them sufficiently, and if you do it with the
Well,
kind of compassion that Schaeffer had.
and one of the things that Dan said, and I'd like to add to that a little bit, and that is how evangelicals tend to fail in this area
Yes.
of not asking questions or so forth. I think part of that is due to this sort of an idea that we want to get the gospel out there so that they can become believers and we can move on to the next one.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been my observation that sometimes it takes a long time of them hearing the questions and hearing the answers, maybe from multiple people. It could be over a 30-year period. Um, I'll give you one quick example is uh, a family of Jehovah's Witnesses that we were fortunate enough to lead to the Lord, as it turns out, had been a long time in process. Um, a Jehovah's Witness joined a bowling league that Joy was on. That's what got us started in this to begin with.
Mhm.
Some years later, she called our helpline. We didn't know that it was her, and and as Joy talked to her, and we discovered that, we were surprised because we didn't even know she was interested.
Mm.
And then we got her information, which she then got to her husband. Both of them were resistant, but their questions were being answered. And they and their kids all came to the faith at the same time.
Mm.
As it turns out, he became a Jehovah's Witness 35 years earlier, and his elderly aunt had been praying for him and giving him information for 35 years.
Mm.
And God raised us up in the meantime. But they also had a whole series of other people that they had
Yeah.
met in their door to door work that gave them bits of information, answering questions
Yes.
that they were afraid to believe until one day they believed. So part of this is just a process of just being patient. God is the one who's doing the work. We're just along for the ride, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me give you an example too, like from the book. Specifically, this is some of you may know who he is. It's Ellis Potter,
Mm.
and I interviewed him. He became a Labrie worker uh, after being there a time. But before that, when the first time he visited Labrie, he visited there as a Buddhist monk.
Mm.
And after visiting, he went and left. But then he found out that a friend of his was still there, so he determined that he would go back and he would evangelize. He would, and he said, "It turns out I was a very poor evangelist as I got converted." And but what he did was he would show up at these. Back then they would have Friday night lectures, and so Schaeffer would lecture and answer questions the whole time,
Mm.
and then they would dismiss. And a lot of times they would dismiss and then pick up where they left off the next week. And so so Ellis comes to him and he's asking these crazy questions. And he says, does God choose the aspects of his character, or does he discover himself to be that way? Another one was this. See, let me find it here. I lost one. Is the non-personal necessarily subpersonal? You know, he was just trying everything he could to stump Schaeffer, and Schaeffer finally he was asked this question by Ellis, and Ellis asked him, "Why is God?" And Schaeffer said, "I don't know." And in that moment, it occurred to Schaeffer, because of the other things that he had been studying, that Schaeffer had just stated an absolute. And in his world, absolutes like that didn't exist. So how is it that that was absolutely true?
Exactly.
And I mean, you know, so you never know, but this went on for weeks and weeks before Ellis really got this notion, and then he couldn't let it go. The Holy Spirit was working on him, and eventually, you know, he came to faith and actually became a part of Schaeffer's ministry. And I've heard Ellis speak several times. I've interviewed him, and Ellis, especially one time, he spoke at one of the Labrie conferences, and just a tremendous man of prayer and deep thought. And he spoke, and it was like the whole room was silent thereafter, because God really truly moved in that moment. Everybody was like, "What did we just hear?" And so this is tremendous, I think, for us as we start to think about this. You know, because sometimes people, as Sylvester said, you know, they said they would answer honest answers to honest questions, but at that point, I'd say they lied. They would answer dishonest questions as well, and that definitely came at them with Ellis, because Ellis was intent on stumping them and turning everything around. But this tremendous need to have patience and friendship, like is being mentioned by the person in the chat, we can't just do this machine gun gospel or approach. We have to take time for the person. And what was also important there too is that several times when Ellis said, "Why is God?" everybody laughed, and Schaeffer quieted everybody. So no, don't laugh, don't laugh. This is a serious question. And so that meant a lot to Ellis, because he was so gracious with him, and that grace went a long way.
Yeah.
And so as we take this further, there are evangelical obstacles. One of the ones that you'll hear, and we kind of begin to talk about this, but the big one that's always been forever: don't ask questions, just believe. There sometimes is a foregone lack of confidence in the truth, so maybe not wanting to engage in questions.
Right.
Some Labrie visitors had actually visited Labrie and had a salvation experience, but they weren't sure if God exists or not. Can you imagine that? But it happened, and this is what Schaeffer would later begin to call evangelical existentialism, because if we're not careful, if our only understanding is some sort of a trip, the salvation trip moment of experience, and then that's the end of it, then basically we're just doing what the existentialists have said. We're trying to find meaning in a moment, and then therefore it's nothing but the moment, and nothing else really matters. We don't believe that. We believe exactly the opposite, that moment should affect the whole of life, should transform us and change us into new beings, and us as well as new believers, as well as apologists, you know. So I think I had a mark for discussion there. Anything more that would you like to add to that?
It's interesting because you're talking about we're talking about all this, and Paul, in dealing with the Corinthians, got similar, if not same kind of issues, because he's dealing with a group of immature believers, and he's telling them in chapter 3, because they're all like, it seems like they're trying to outdo each other, to do evangelism and win people. Oh, I'm with, because I'm with Apollos, and I'm with this one, and I'm with Paul, and I'm that, and then Paul's like, you guys are not even ready for the good stuff. You're still drinking milk because you can't even get this together. You're in the flesh, you're striving, you have jealousy, and none of that matters, because no matter, he says, what is Apollos and what is Paul? He says, I planted, Apollos waters, but God ultimately is the one that gives the growth.
That's
and a
right.
lot of times evangelicals, even when I was young and I grew up in church, the whole objective was to, let's get them in, let's get them to church and meet them with the Bible, in a sense, and evangelize them, and then they'll come, to know the Lord. But we don't do that. That's not our job. Our job is to just plant seeds.
Yeah, I mean, we thoroughly believe in evangelism. We thoroughly believe,
but we don't convert people.
The point of salvation. But
right.
At the same time, it can't just be a dog and pony sales show.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's not God.
That's not. To Don's story, that this is sometimes it takes several layers and several links and connecting the dots with various people before it comes to that point. Sometimes it's immediate. I won't say it's not.
Sometimes.
But most of the time, it takes some time for different people. So.
Yeah, and then, I mean, as we're asking these questions, it's important to note too, in the context of Labrie, would begin to ask questions, but they would spend a lot of time in prayer. Before that. So prayer was a first thought in Labrie. Yep.
Yes.
And actually, it's kind of interesting too. If you study Edith's Labrie book, she even talks about, them praying with the non-believers present, and they're smirking and whatever, but it's all happening before them, and then the reality would sink in when the prayers were answered. And the reality that God is there and God is providing and all these things are happening. So
imagine that, huh?
Yeah, tremendous testimony.
Yes,
that is to live that before the lost. And
cool.
So the next part of this is the demonstration of truth and apologetics. And what I want to do here, I'm just going to elevate a lot of Schaeffer's quotes here, and we'll walk through, and then the scriptural aspects as well. And so you'll see that some of this is really getting at the question of truth in apologetics that may not always be thought of. So is, if Christianity is true, should it not be able to withstand scrutiny? Schaeffer really believed that if I believe in truth, and his words usually were true truth, it's God's truth.
Right.
It's not just man's circumstantial or accidental truth, or any sort of subjective truth. This is absolute truth. That is, and then what true reality has been imparted to us in revelation, God's revelation. If it's true, it should be able to withstand the scrutiny of questions. And so that becomes a huge thing. So as we think about that, Schaeffer says this right off the bat: do you think for a moment we will have credibility if we say we believe the truth and yet do not practice the truth in religious matters? So Schaeffer, of course, again, here is speaking in his book, True Spirituality. Actually, I'm sorry, this is To Constitute to Reality, but he's speaking in his volume on a Christian view of spirituality. But this is a statement that is talking about credibility with respect to truth. And this is kind of the normal fare for Schaeffer. And then we'll look at another one here. There's one thing I do not understand for Bible believing Christians, and that is to be a Bible believing Christian and not be excited about the Christian answers.
Mm.
There is something especially horrible to be Orthodox, evangelical, Bible believing without excitement. And if you've read that and you're not, and it maybe is seeming like, why does he want me? Does he want me to work up some sort of excitement? No, he's talking about if we truly understand that the Christian worldview and its answers to the basic philosophical questions are true, that we have the answers, and not only that, the benefits of the Christian position
Hmm.
and living in Christ are bringing about all of this tremendous grace and all of these tremendous fruits,
Hmm.
then why would we not be excited about that?
Amen.
It kind of, as the more I've thought about this, I wonder, so why in my life sometimes I've not been as excited about the answers as others. And it's like, you know what's kind of interesting is that when sometimes we as Christians go through various trials or troubles and things,
Hmm.
and then we encounter the answer at that moment, it's much more rich than it was before.
Hmm.
And then we realize, oh, that was meant to happen for my good, so that I could actually take stock in that, and I could really begin to truly appreciate what I've been given. I've been given tremendous answers, and I shouldn't casually just relax about my excitement about the creation, fall, redemption, glorification. Those things should be so connected to my thinking and my overall heart that I'm excited regularly about this. I could speak much more about this because it moves me. What Schaeffer was being to say is, and it's interesting. This is from his Wheaton lectures.
Hmm.
He gets to talk about that. That's way back in '65 before his books came out.
Hmm.
So this one, this is important for us as the demonstration of truth. He says, God did not mean that there should be no evidence of the reality of the victory of the cross between Jesus' ascension and his second coming. God has always intended that Christians should be the evidence, the demonstration of Christ's victory on the cross. What in the world's he getting at here? Well, the demonstration, not just in our words, but also our attitudes, our heart, our family, the all of the good that comes from living in Christ, even in a fallen world, should be persuasive, and it should commend the gospel. So that holistic understanding should stretch there, and stretch there so much so that we can really convey that by inviting people in, or by spending time with others, with our family. There's something that is sacred about what God has given us in the benefits of the gospel. I think sometimes that modern evangelicalism sometimes has gotten real soft on, or real excited on evangelism and then the point of conversion, but then relaxed on the benefits. And then you see chaos and other things because that's not our focus. Our focus is on evangelism. Well, wait a second, hold on, because the whole gospel involves really taking the person of Christ at his word. He is the Lord of the universe, and as Lord, he is Lord over all, and so therefore, everything about Christ is Lord over me and applies to me, and then his victory applies to me as well, and I should be evidence of that victory taking place before the eyes of the world. I think what's a subtle nuance here is that, yeah, people will sometimes talk about, yeah, you got to live rightly. You got to live rightly as a Christian. But I don't hear apologists go there as hard as Schaeffer does. Schaeffer really pounds this in to the point where if my heart is not actually in a place where I am acknowledging God as the creator and Lord, I'm not really believing the truth and acting as if I'm conveying what I'm speaking to this individual. And more than that, if that reality is not present in me, then do I need to stop and rethink things and be sure. And so that's where, and obviously, he's not talking about Christian perfectionism. He's not talking about the process of sanctification, but he does mean that sanctification should be being applied. We should be seeing the benefits of the gospel in our life, and we should be able to convey something of that in our evangelism. Otherwise, why would we want people to join our group here? Why would we want to invite them in if they were just inviting them in on a sales pitch and there's nothing there?
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't heal anyone, and that's
Right.
his point.
True.
Very good. Okay, so this one. There's the.
You've gone too far this time.
I've gone too far this time. Yeah, it's like. Had to wait till it calms down. Okay. And here's where, he makes statements like this where and this is true spirituality, but Christians are to demonstrate God's character, which is a moral demonstration, but it is not only to be a demonstration of moral principles. It is a demonstration of his being, his existence.
Mm.
So I think sometimes in modern evangelicalism, we have taught about, well, you got to be moral. And there's some of the legalists that really pound on the moral.
Mm-hmm.
But am I transformed?
Mm.
Am I living a new life? Am I showing not just moral things where I'm obeying all the rules, but that there is a flowering existence of the truth in my life that is touching my family and touching my church and touching my world? And I think all of us may be convicted in some respect to that, where we're not quite there all the time. But that should be what we're striving for, is to convey something of his existence. Because here's the thing, Schaeffer connects the dots here, and I think that it's so obvious that sometimes we miss it. Mm-hmm. In Romans 1, it talks about that we are to that we're acknowledging God's creation, right? And that creation testifies, right? But then we're a part of that creation. And when we testify, we are glorifying him as well. So pretty moving stuff. So I'll leave it at this one, and then I'll get to a couple scriptures here. The final great concept of truth is that Christianity is true to what is there. I often think that one of the reasons there's such an air of unreality in much of the church and for many people is that they do not really understand what is meant when we say Christianity is true. It is not that it is merely true to a creed, though we should be true to our creeds. It is not even that it is true to the Bible, though certainly our Christianity should be true to the full inspiration of Scripture. But it is rather that Christianity is true to what is really there. It explains why the universe is here, why it has its complexity and its form. It gives us the truth about who man is and the great requirement, the truth that God is there. It tells us that our final environment is not impersonal, but personal. We have an intelligent knowledge, which in the middle of the 20th century, we can hold with integrity. Moving stuff there. And then a couple verses that I think touch on Schaeffer's, obviously, that you guys will know. walk in wisdom toward outsiders. Make the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that they may know how you ought to answer. So that you may know how you ought to answer each person. I think that touches really close to what Schaeffer's trying to do. Is that he's walking in wisdom toward outsiders, and he's making the best use of his time, trying to not just make a proclamation and walk off, but actually spend time where it's accepted or where it's needed to help them through. Let your speech always be gracious. That's a big thing for Schaeffer, is that he's some have summarized his viewpoint. Truth without love is ugly, and love without truth is compromise. Think about that for a second. Truth without love is ugly. Love without truth is compromise. So we can love them all day and have no truth, and we're giving them nothing.
Right.
But if we love them and we give them truth, that's a true meal. And also we season it with salt. We're giving them something of edification that is a preservative, that it's going to preserve them, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So you're literally answering the questions here. And I think that's so significant. And then I think that was it there. So good. So final thoughts, everyone.
Very deep stuff. and yet very simple, which is pretty, I think that's the uniqueness of Schaeffer.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, it's like some of this, I recall reading it and I'm like, well, duh, sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'm like, this is so deep, because it's a nuance that I think I've seen a lot of people miss. And a lot of people miss about Schaeffer, that they're not truly understanding maybe the depth of what it means to be a Schaeffer apologist, to be striving for this deeper impact in exhibiting the benefits of the gospel, and then also the way that we treat people as acknowledging their existence, so that we can speak to that existence in a way that's profitable and a blessing to them. It's both simple but yet very profound in its implications, because it begins to touch their whole life, and begins to touch our whole life. And I think that's the nuance of at least the base there. One thing we'll go into is taking it further into how we can analyze the questions further, and deal with that in the next class. But other thoughts, Don? I thought I saw you start to speak. Yeah.
Well, is it fundamentally a difference between viewing giving the gospel as a task we must do versus a life that we live that includes the gospel?
Yeah, I think it's that, and then maybe just a hair more, with the sense that everything that we do is through a gospel worldview mindset. Like it's not just rose-colored stained glass windows, as to quote Petra, but it's actually our whole life is truly transformed with that color and beauty.
Well, when I think of Willow Creek when they first began, and why did Bill Hybels do what he did? He had this idea, and he got it largely from fundamentalists and evangelicals who proclaimed the gospel like every Sunday. And he thought something's wrong here, because they're proclaiming the gospel every week, and there's not unbelievers really coming into the church. And
nothing's happening.
This idea then came to him that if our task in the church service is to proclaim the gospel, we have to find a way to get unbelievers in there to hear it. Therefore, they sort of the seeker-sensitive idea.
Right.
Now, it's my view, whether you like it or not, that the ministry of the church is different than the mission of the church.
Right.
And so, primarily, what should be happening in the church is discipling the believers, training the believers, challenging the believers, caring for the believers. It's really family oriented, preparing the ambassadors for the faith to go out and share the gospel in this other culture. They're ambassadors to another culture,
Hmm.
to which they are to be making disciples. So, and disciple making is something that's an ongoing process. You disciple people into the faith, and then they're discipling after they're in the faith. So it doesn't really ever change.
Hmm.
But many churches see everything really as all evangelism all the time, which is why the church is weak, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So Schaeffer is touching on this other aspect of a full life as a Christian
Yes.
that includes apologetics, but it's more than that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the complete thing, not just partial.
Yeah, Schaeffer, and I mentioned two contents, two realities, and then the actual lecture that he did at the World Congress on evangelism. And one of the things that really stood out there is he said this, and it just kind of blew me away with the first time I heard it. He said, God saved the whole man.
Right.
The whole man
Hmm.
is redeemed in Jesus Christ.
Right.
So what he was pointing out is that, God's not just stopping at a minor notion of evangelism. God means to save the whole man.
Right.
And that means that is a transformative thing in evangelism, but also it should be that way in our apologetic. And sometimes I know that I've encountered apologists who separate evangelism from apologetics in very strict modes. With Schaeffer, he's like, if your apologetics don't lead to evangelism, then I question the metric or the meaning, really, or purpose of the apologetic. And then he talks about pre-evangelism. So he's like, not only is there pre-evangelism, there's evangelism, and there's apologetic, and there's finally salvation. And so he's not wanting to cut off that scope and say that it's only confined to limited arguments or limited time frames. We're talking about the whole man being redeemed in Jesus Christ. So we have to take the logical steps to be rightly obedient to God in that moment, and do at least what He has commanded us to do graciously, and yet at the same time let the Holy Spirit work and not get in the way to bring about that change.
Well, and with that, we probably should wrap it up for this evening. We've gone over a little bit,
Yes.
but I think it was worthwhile. So
Hmm.
thank
Great.
you all. And for those who are out there, we will be back next week. And Dan's going to tell me whatever the secret is going to be for next week, and we'll put it in our crux. So
There you go.
adios.
All right.
Sayonara.
Thank you.